was talking to a young woman who's a black, very capable lawyer. There's another guy who came in at the same time as her. She gets a little pay rise, it's all good. But then she finds out that he got a bigger pay rise and he also gets promoted. And then it happens again. It didn't make any sense. It wasn't like he was particularly that much better than her. And in fact, on paper, they were basically the same. And then one day, she's sitting in a dinner with the senior partner and he's talking about this guy. And he says, you know what, in many ways, he reminds me of myself. You know, I can see him one day being a senior partner. He sees himself in him. He sees him almost like a son, right? And at that moment, the light comes on. There's no one who looks like her. There's no one looking down from that height at her who thinks, she reminds me of myself. And that's the problem.
Hello and welcome back to Cutting Edge. In today's episode, we're joined by Dawid, co-founder of Reddington, mallowstreet, and the 10,000 Interns Foundation. Dawid began his career as a barrister in London, subsequently spending 16 years in investment banking at NatWest Markets and Merrill Lynch. Dawid now extends his influence to policy work with various governmental departments, and he serves on several charity boards.
What you find is that most firms, especially as startups, they don't really understand or implement red, blue, black properly. Then guess what? You wake up one day, then the firm falls over because you can't deal with all the work that's coming in.
Dawid opens up about the persecution he faced early on in his career, where he was denied job opportunities based on his background. This setback fueled his drive to enact positive change, as seen in initiatives like the 10,000 Interns Foundation. He also touches on the Red Blue Black framework, which has helped him to grow and establish Reddington, which advises large institutional pension funds and insurance companies. Now, let's get started. You have a very impressive background. If we look at it from a work experience point of view, you've gone from being a barrister in the legal field to moving to the field of investment banking, having worked for very prestigious companies, the likes of NatWest Markets, the likes of Merrill Lynch, before eventually co-founding your own company and being involved in several initiatives. So I would love to dive into a bit deeper your journey, how it all started, and then from there, talk a bit more about your current projects and your impact on diversity and inclusiveness within the world of finance.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to cover. You know, I turned 60 yesterday. It was a big day. I had my big birthday. I got to the 6th floor, as my Ghanaian friends say. And so it's exciting. So it's been a long career. I think I've been working for 35 years, something like that. And as you kind of said, it's been a very long and windy road. I started out as a lawyer, and then I became an investment banker, and then I was an entrepreneur. I co-founded a couple of companies. And now I'm involved at kind of policy level, doing some work with various government departments. And yeah, life is very, and I'm sitting on various charitable boards as well. So it's interesting. So it's been an interesting journey. I mean, originally I wanted to do medicine. My father's a doctor, a Ghanaian doctor. My mother's an English nurse. So actually my story starts really with my parents. My father was a Ghanaian medical student here back in the 50s. He arrived here in the early 1950s. I think he came in September 53. So kind of the same time as Windrush, who was coming from the West Indies. He was coming up from what was then the Gold Coast. So he arrived here, studied medicine, met my wife, who was an English nurse. I mean, he was just supposed to come here and qualify and then go back to Ghana. And I think it was all set up. He was supposed to marry a Ghanaian lady, but he kind of either didn't get the memo or he lost it. But anyway, he married my mum in 1962. And so I was born in August 1963. And, my father was always very encouraging of me in pretty much whatever I wanted to do. He wanted me to do medicine. That was very much the thing. But, I got my A-level results. I know a lot of A-level results came out this week or late last week, and a lot of students didn't get their expected grades, I think. And so there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of talk around what happens when you don't get your grades. Well, I was one of those students way back in the early 1980s. I think I was 18 or 19. I didn't get my grades. And I remember my father coming home and sort of saying, so son, did you get it? Are we going to do medicine together, kind of thing? And I said, Dad, I didn't get my grades. I mean, I hadn't worked hard enough. We'd just come from Ghana, because I grew up in Ghana. I was 17 when I came here. So I hadn't been here very long. And I hadn't worked hard enough anyway. And I did physics, chemistry, maths, crashed and burned, to be honest with you. And I remember my dad just saying, look, son, and I remember the sort of feeling of intense disappointment that I had, that I'd let my dad down. This was a big deal for him, and it was for me as well. All I had to do was kind of do enough work, but I hadn't done enough. And I remember him just saying, son, it's cool, it's okay. You never made your way out of first gear. If you make your way to second gear or even third gear, you're gonna blow everyone's mind. You just haven't found your way to get to second gear, but you're gonna find your way. And you're an incredible kid, and you're gonna make it. And he was just so supportive, and he didn't have to be. I mean, he could have really said, you should have worked hard, but he didn't do any of that. And so I've always had this real sense of encouragement from my father and also my mother as well, both very encouraging of me. And so I sort of had to redo my A-levels, and I ended up basically switching to law instead. I did that. And I ended up going to the bar. So I didn't get into the university that I wanted to, and obviously, because I crashed and burned. But I got a law degree, and then I went to the bar, and the aim was to become a barrister. And I think I had my first experience of what it is to, people sometimes say, have you ever experienced racial prejudice? And I can't pretend I've experienced a lot, at least not to my face. But one example was in those early days when I was at the bar, and I talk about the kinks in the hose pipe, so I'll come to that in a second. But I remember just having that interview at the bar, and basically, it all went very well, and they asked me some questions about the set of chambers I was trying to get into, and the idea was that I was going to be doing what they call a second six pupillage, and then that would then lead to a tenancy, which is when they take you on as a barrister. So very young, you just do your pupillage, and then you get taken on, and then you do tenancy. And they said at the time, look, we'll take you on to do the pupillage, but we can't, after you've done your 6 months pupillage, we can't then take you on to become a tenant, because we took on a black guy last year, and we can't do it 2 years in a row. So we're really sorry. We just want to be open with you. Hope it's okay. We're just telling you, just putting it out there, just saying you'd be more than welcome to come and do a pupillage, but the tenancy, I'm afraid you're going to have to find somewhere else. And that, I think, for me, was the first time that I kind of hit a brick wall for no reason other than that I was the wrong. I was the wrong hue, I was the wrong color. And I talk about the kinks in the hose pipe. I give this example sometimes. I say, imagine you're watering the lawn, and it's a hot summer's day. You're watering the lawn, and suddenly the water stops. And you think, that's funny. Who's turned the tap off? So you go and you check the tap, but the tap's actually on. Mm-hmm. And then you think, well, the tap's on, how come there's no water flowing? Then you realize, there's a kink in the hose pipe. So you go and you find the kink, you unkink it, you go back to the front, you pick up the hose, there's still no water. So you think, it's funny, tap's on, no kink. Then you realize there's more than one kink. So now you go kink hunting, and you unkink all the kinks, and finally the water starts to flow. And that's a little bit like that's what it's like if you are from a minority background. There are all these kinks in the hose pipe, and that would be an example. My experience at the bar was just this kink in the hose pipe. Suddenly the water's flowing, everything's good, it's all going well. They like me, I like them, but we took on a black guy last year, and that's a kink right there in the hose pipe. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into the discussion. But really, if companies want to succeed and they want to see people coming through the system, you have to unkink not just one, but you have to unkink all the kinks in the hose pipe, and then that's when the water starts to flow. So I went to the bar, and they basically told me, sorry, we took on someone last year who's a black guy, I'm not going to do it twice. So I left and I went to the city. And it turned out the city wasn't quite as fussy about these things, so I was there for 30 years. And I started out at NatWest Capital Markets, which was really a big experience in that I wasn't really a numbers guy. I mean, my maths A level demonstrated that I'm not really a numbers guy. I don't know why I did maths, physics, chemistry. I mean, I'm not. I mean, I can do my numbers, but not particularly. So I ended up working as a lawyer at NatWest Capital Markets. And there was a guy called Duncan Goldie Morrison, who was my boss's boss's boss. He was quite a senior guy in the industry and in the bank. And he took an interest in me, and he basically was the guy who gave me a chance. And he just said, look, I think you would do well in the main business. So I was working in the legal department. He said, I think you can come into the main business, which was derivative structuring. I was like, Duncan, look, I'm not really a derivative structuring kind of a guy. I'm a lawyer. I've been doing law at this point for like 6-7 years. He said, no, I think you'd be good, and I think you could do it. And he kind of believed in me, which I think is what you need. You need someone who believes in you. And so I went into that department, and I struggled when I was there. And at one point I nearly got myself fired. There was a new guy who came in who basically said, who is this guy? He doesn't seem to be doing any deals, doesn't seem to be doing any transactions. I'd only been there a few months, and I hadn't really learnt the ropes. But my immediate boss, who was a guy called Tim Pettit, he took a real interest in trying to help me succeed. And although I nearly got myself fired, my boss's boss kind of said, I don't know who hired this guy, but we need to get him out of here because he's not doing any business. Tim Pettit basically showed me how to close transactions and how to have conversations and how to build relationships and the whole business of marketing and building trust. And suddenly I found that I could do it, and I found that I could understand it, and I put in my time and the effort and worked pretty hard, and ended up basically becoming a pretty successful operator in the derivatives space. I did that for 10 years, and then I got a call from a headhunter saying, guys at Merrill Lynch are looking for someone. Do you want to come and maybe have a chat to them? So I did, and it was a bigger job, and it was a promotion, and it was looking after the whole of the UK and looking after, I think it was Scandinavia as well, and Ireland, and it was a bigger brief. So I moved and I went to Merrill, and then while I was at Merrill Lynch, it was a bigger canvas, and I could do some quite interesting things there, and I got very involved in the pensions risk management industry. It's just how to manage risks, and lots of pension funds, it didn't seem to me and to my team, were managing risk quite the way that they needed to. The rules were all changing, the regulations were changing. Suddenly you needed to look at your liabilities on what they call a mark-to-market basis, so a present value of your liabilities versus your assets. And the whole world was changing quite fast. And so, we came up with this new way of managing risk, which hadn't really been used before. So we called it Red Alpha, but it ended up becoming liability-driven investments, LDI. It's been in the news quite a lot recently. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I ended up doing that, and we hedged a big pension fund called the Friends Provident Pension Fund, which very successfully. But by 2006, it became clear to me that I was going to need to move away from, if I really wanted to get this thing going, I was going to need to move away from working inside a bank and set up a consulting firm that would really be able to change the way pension funds manage risk. Because by 2006, it seemed to me, at any rate, that the industry wasn't moving as quickly as it needed to deal with this risk that was unfolding, which was really lower and lower interest rates. And not just lower and lower interest rates, there were also higher inflation expectations long term. So you had, the combination was something called the real yield, which was falling and which was driving up pension liabilities. There was a lot of volatility within pension funds that wasn't managed, and this needed to be stabilized. So we set up Reddington. I left with another great friend of mine called Rob Gardner, who worked with me at Merrill Lynch, and we left, and it was a big deal. In 2006, the sun was shining, the sky was blue. It was pre the global financial crisis, so there was nothing on the horizon. Everything was calm and bright. What could possibly go wrong? And so we started this firm, Reddington, co-founded it together, just down the road in Shoreditch, and it was quite a thing. We didn't have any clients to start with. We were just two guys. We were operating in an industry that was really dominated by these huge actuarial firms that just dominated the entire landscape. If you looked up the whole skyline actuarially with these three firms, and then we kind of came along and set up our little firm Reddington, and we tried to get into the advisory space, and we did. We got a couple of clients. We started with the Royal Mail, and I remember going in to see. It was actually, I think it was the Treasury. So the Treasury had summoned the Royal Mail to come and have a big conversation about managing risk. And they hired us. So we'd only been going about 20 minutes. I mean, it was really, we'd been going about a couple of weeks, literally. We hadn't even had our business cards printed. But they hired us and asked us to go along and talk to the Treasury about some of our ideas about managing risk. I mean, they had this huge unhedged liability that was extremely volatile. So we went in. I remember the guy from the government, I remember him looking at my business card, which was, I mean, we didn't have offices, didn't have anything. I remember him just reading it out. The room was packed with all these sort of civil servants and pretty senior government folk. And I remember him looking at my card and just saying, Dawid Konotey-Ahulu, 80 Harmer Green Lane, Welwyn Garden City. And then putting the card down, and it was, his kind of point was like, really, to the Royal Mail, this is kind of as good as you can do. But actually we came up with the solution, and the Royal Mail got themselves into a good place. Took a couple of years, but we got there. And we got some other clients, and slowly, we built a firm that ended up being really quite successful, changing the landscape, the way pension funds managed risk, and pretty soon the entire industry was doing it, was managing risk in that way. I mean, there were others working on it as well. It wasn't just us. I don't want to claim that we were the only guys doing it, but we were certainly right there at the beginning. And Reddington was this small group of band of brothers and sisters working out of this freezing cold little workshop in Old Street. Now it's nice. You go to Old Street now, it's nice and it's shiny, but back then it was freezing in winter and it was boiling in the summer. There was no aircon, nothing at all. And you'd see these asset managers would come in, they'd have come from the US to come and see us, and they'd come and you could see them driving in down below us, and they'd be looking, thinking, this can't be right. Like, that was what it says on the map, and coming in and talking to us. So yeah, then we got hit by the global financial crisis, and that was a big deal. You know, we couldn't raise any money. We didn't have enough clients to be able to pay the bills, and we were still hiring people. And so it was really a difficult time. A huge amount of grit and resilience and sense of purpose and believing in what we were doing. I think we didn't pay ourselves anything for the first three years. We were just, living kind of hand to mouth. It was a huge deal. And yeah, they say when you're an entrepreneur, it's like setting sail on a huge ocean in a very small boat, knowing that you don't have the resources to get to the other side, but you set sail anyway. And that's very much what that was. And we set sail, and of course, as I say, the sea was pretty calm, but when we set sail, but then we got hit by this insane storm. I mean, we'll never forget the 2008, 2009 crisis. To have just set up a business 18 months earlier, when really everything depends on some cash flow coming in, having some kind of credit lines, or having investors. We didn't have any of that at all. I mean, we literally didn't have any of that. There were times when we just weren't sure how we were going to pay our staff, but we did. We made our way through it. And in 2009, we set up another business called mallowstreet, which is really about bringing the industry together. And that's also now very successful. And now we're doing some pretty cool stuff in the AI space as well, and bringing that into mallowstreet, which we think is going to transform how the asset management industry and industries beyond that, how they market their products in a more sophisticated way than they have done in the past. Just because now, you can analyze conversations. Conversations are really data, so you can now analyze a conversation and look at what's actually happening in a way that you never could in the past. So if I've got a product that I want to talk to you about, I can now record the conversation. I can work out whether I really landed my messages, whether you were really listening. I can kind of score myself, and I can look at whether I'm improving. It's a bit like an F1 race. I can look at every time I go around the lap, around the circuit, I can look at whether my lap time is improving and where I'm not landing my message quite as well as I could. So that's all very interesting. So I'm doing that as well. So that's sort of Reddington now and mallowstreet, because it's now been going for Reddington now 17 years, something like that, and mallowstreet something like 14 years. And then, I'm doing a bunch of other stuff as well. So it's been a long, winding road, but here we are.
There's a lot to unpack there, and it's almost a question for me as to where to start. But I think it goes back to sitting down with your dad and the incredible support he showed. And he mentioned this idea of finding a second gear. Throughout that career trajectory, when did you first find that second gear? And with these pivots that you made from law to investment banking, and then from investment banking to starting several companies, did you find yourself constantly trying to find a new gear?
Yes, I think finding your second gear is a huge thing that's for some people happens very early. You find your second gear when you're in your early teens, and you just make your way up through the gears, and then you do your GCSEs, and then you do your A levels, and then you do your degree, and somehow it all just kind of works, and you just find yourself moving up through the gears, and it's all great. But other people really struggle, and they find their gears later in life. And I think I was certainly one of those. I'm a very curious guy. I'm driven by curiosity. I find everything interesting. If I turn on the TV, it doesn't matter what it is. And my wife will say, "Well, why are you watching that?" And I say, "Because it's interesting." And she says, "That's not interesting." I say, "It is." I find everything fascinating, and I guess I'm easily distracted. Historically, I have been. I mean, I can focus when I need to, but because I find everything immeasurably interesting and curious, and I find people very interesting. So I love meeting new people and finding out what makes them tick. And I think that means that sometimes, studying is about just shutting other stuff out and just getting your head down and just working really hard and just doing your 10,000 hours and becoming a master at whatever it is. If you're doing physics, you need to just be able to just lock yourself in a room, learn what you need to learn, or economics or whatever it is, and just crush it in the exam. That's the task in hand. And I didn't get that until way later. But I think once I got into the business of working, and I started getting paid to do work, and because that's what happens. Suddenly someone puts some money in your bank account. You're like, okay, that's interesting. So that's how it works. And then in the world of banking, it's very high pressure. If you don't work, they're going to kick you out. So you suddenly, at some point, you wake up and you realize this isn't a video game where I just can press restart and reset and the whole thing kind of starts again. Like I have one shot at this, or I'm going to be out. There are lots of people who want to sit in my seat. So I think the light started to come on maybe in my early mid-20s, and at various points I realized that I was going to have to work extremely hard. But it wasn't just about that. I think it was also about trying to understand what was I good at doing. There were some things I wasn't very good at, but there were other things that I innately could do. So, for example, I realized that in the world of very complex derivatives marketing, one of the real issues that the industry had was that they would come up with these complex products that were highly effective and that worked very well in helping companies or banks or building societies to manage risk. But the recipients of the information didn't really understand. They just didn't quite understand what it was that they were being asked to enter into. So they wouldn't do them. And so this business of marketing product, complex product, and being able to explain what it is, what's your situation, what's the pain that you're in at the moment as a CFO or as a CEO, as someone running a company, what's the issue that you've got, and how can this help? I found that I was quite good at being able to come up with a story that would explain, or a narrative that would explain exactly what it was. So I'd say imagine that, and I talk about flying in a plane at a certain height, and there were these various risks, and there are mountains, and there's lightning, and you need to kind of protect yourselves against these different risks, and this is how you might do it. So I'd sort of telling stories basically that were pertinent and apt. I found I could do that, and I found that people listened to that and they'd engage with it much more than some of my contemporaries who would say, so, let's imagine that your problem is X, and and imagine that this is a solution Y, and if you square X, then you divide Y, and you add the two together, then you get Z. I didn't do any of that stuff, but it seemed like it was something that I could do. So I found my niche, really worked on that, and of course you get excited by doing that. I really fell in love with the idea of ikigai. The ikigai is a Japanese concept, which is where you find your real purpose in life, your meaning in life. And you get it often from your relationships, but it's also from your job, and it's from what you do. And the concept really has 4 parts to it. And the idea is that as you go through life, you try to get all 4 parts, you kind of get them all ticked. So the first is be very good at what you do. So you need to be good at this thing, but that's not enough. That's only one. And for that, you need to do your 10,000 hours. There's no way around it. You have to do that, number one. Number 2, it needs to be something that you love. So you might be very good at it, but you don't really enjoy it. So it starts to get really purposeful and real meaning when you love what you do. So you're good at it and you love what you do. Thirdly, this needs to be something that has real purpose and meaning for the world. There has to be a reason that you're doing it. You see the world becoming a better place. That is a very important thing. And number 4 is, and you can be remunerated for it. You can actually be paid for doing this thing. You do all those 4, you have all those 4 things together, good at it, you love it, it has purpose and meaning, and you can get paid for it, and that's your ikigai. This is the Japanese concept of ikigai. And I think a lot of people kind of want it now. They want all those 4 things now. And if they don't have it now, then they're just not going to stick around at their job. They're going to go somewhere else. We've done doing it for 6 months. I had someone come to me once and say, I think I need to go on a sabbatical. And I'm like, okay, but how long have you been working? About 6 months now. I feel it's time. Okay, you need to work for a bit longer than 6 months. I mean, they went on their sabbatical, but you kind of need to work for longer than 6 months before it's time to take your one year sabbatical. And I just think that this idea of getting your head down and being very good at what you do is huge. And then you learn to love it sometimes later on. I did a lot of stuff in terms of working hard that I didn't love at all. but I was getting better and better at what I was doing. Some of it was really hard. Some of it was just extraordinarily demanding. But eventually, when you get good at it, you learn to love it. And then you also learn to work out what that thing is doing in the world and ask yourself, is this thing helping in the world? And if it is, then that's a good thing as well. And if you're good and you love it and it's hard to do and it's got purpose and meaning, often you'll get paid for doing it as well. You don't have to get paid a king's ransom, but you do need to get paid. You need to be able to pay the bills. You need to be able to take time out and spend time with the people that you love and invest time in your relationships. You need to have a good work-life balance. Get all those things together, and I think you end up in a good place. And I think that's what, over my 35 years, is what I've sort of ended up kind of doing as I've moved through the different gears. And that also helps you to move through the gears. You say, okay, I can do this now. Okay, and then in the third gear, you're like, you know what? And let me take a little more risk here. That seems like a smart thing to do. And then you move into fourth gear, and suddenly, before you know it, without even thinking about it, you're in fifth gear. You're like, okay, I don't even know how that happened, but I went from first to second, third, fourth, and now here I am in fifth.
And that shifting of the gears presumably comes with experience. But then you mentioned this phrase, ikigai, this concept. Is that something which you have found once in one area? For you, does it span several different jobs, opportunities, and initiatives? Or do you see this as this concept that it's always evolving and that your ikigai is actually a dynamic concept rather than a static one?
It's definitely an evolving concept, for sure, because you get better and better at what you do. In my case now, I'm doing probably 6 or 7 completely different things. I'm sitting on a couple of boards. So I sit on the board of Reddington and the board of mallowstreet. So those are sort of commercial ventures. Those are the 2 companies that I co-founded. But I'm also on the board of various charitable organizations as well that are doing great things and are changing the world. So I sit on the board of Mission 44, which is Lewis Hamilton's charitable foundation, which is an extraordinary organization and which funds other charities which are working in the space of underrepresentation, really around employment, empowerment, and education for people who don't have a seat at the table. And it's somewhere that Lewis Hamilton has a huge place in his heart for. His own experience. To think that he's gone from where he was as a young boy in school. I think he was told, you'll never amount to anything, and now he's Sir Lewis Hamilton, greatest of all time. Is an extraordinary journey. So I sit on that board, and that's really a powerful organization. And then also Somerset House. Somerset House is also very involved in the creative arts and is an extraordinary organization. I don't know how much you know about what Somerset House does, but it basically opens its doors to a couple of thousand young people who are all trying to find their wings and find their place. And it just gives them a place to be creatives. And you get mentorship, and you have the opportunity to exhibit your stuff, and you get support, and it's an incredibly powerful place as well, doing some great things. And then 10,000 interns. We started out as 10,000 black interns, but now we've got a disability piece to it as well. So we've rebranded with 10,000 interns, the 10,000 Interns Foundation. That's doing incredible things. We've got an extraordinarily effective CEO, Rebecca Aching-Ajulu-Bushell. She's doing amazing work, and she's got a great team, Nana Campbell and others. They're doing a great job, so I sit on the board of that as well. And then I'm doing some stuff in policy space with the government, working with the Department for Education. So lots of different things, but if you add it all up, this ikigai is all around now, bringing your experience to bear on different boards. It's funny, you sit on a board, and funny enough, the same issues keep coming up that you kind of have to deal with. So yeah, and you learn to love it more, and you learn to, in my case, of course, as I'm doing more and more charitable work, I'm not getting paid to do most of that stuff, but that's okay. I'm now, I just turned 60 yesterday, I told you. And, this country has been very good to me, I have to say, on any view. And so I'm giving back now. I'm trying to give people talk about giving back. And I think that's what I'm trying to do at most levels that I can. Yeah.
It's funny because one of our first guests on this podcast, Cutting Edge, was Tolu, and she testified to the importance of 10,000 black interns at the time in helping her to land her role at Hamilton Lane Private Equity. So it's
wonderful.
A full circle that we're sitting here with the co-founder of the organization.
Fabulous.
On a side note, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. You'll be doing us a massive favor. You can keep up to date with our latest content, and the bigger the podcast, the bigger the guests. I do want to take you back to one really important episode in your life that you mentioned earlier on, which was you were sat with someone and they said, unfortunately, we can't offer you this more permanent role because of this said quota based on their demographics, which is obscene. And in this day and age, to think that was even said is just mind-boggling. But I wanted to ask, what was your reaction to that? How did it make you feel?
Well, I remember it like it was yesterday, because they didn't say it to me directly. They said it via someone else that I knew who I was working for in a different set of chambers. And what had happened was that one of the people who'd interviewed me gave him a call and just said, look, we've got this tricky situation here. We really like this guy. Love to offer him a job, but you know what it's like. It's pretty tricky. We took on a black guy last year and we just can't do it 2 years in a row. Do you want to have a chat with him and see if he's happy to come here anyway? Just putting all our cards on the table. And so it wasn't quite as brazen as them telling me to my face. It kind of came through a back channel, and they thought they were doing the right thing in some kind of weird way. And I remember at the time just thinking, well, I guess this industry is not for me. I don't remember particularly feeling hurt particularly. I mean, I think I was. I went home and I told my wife, I said, this is what they said. And I think I was hurt, to be honest. But ultimately, the message I was getting was this wasn't an industry for me, and I needed to go and cut my teeth somewhere else. But just looking back on it, the fact that I can still remember it so vividly, I remember it like it was yesterday. And actually, it was in 1987. So we're going back kind of 36 years. So the fact I still remember it shows that it was something that was a very deep thing. And I think when you do hit that kind of a roadblock that's not your fault, you do stop, and it does rock you. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a young woman who's a black, very capable lawyer. She told me this story, which I thought was very powerful, which is she was given an opportunity to come and work. I mean, she's qualified and she got a scholarship and she was academically brilliant. So she was given an opportunity to come and work at a law firm, very high-powered law firm here. And she came in at the same time as a few other people, and there's another guy who came in at the same time as her. And let's call him David. It's not his name, but let's call him David. So she comes in at the same time as David, and it's all going well. And she, after a year, she's doing okay. It's fine. There's nothing to give the impression that she's not. She's fine. She gets a little pay rise. It's all good. But then she finds out that he got a bigger pay rise, and he also gets promoted. Not a huge promotion, but a bit of a promotion. And then it happens again. And then she gets a bit more of a promotion, but he gets more of a promotion. And this gap kind of starts to widen and to open up. And if it hadn't been for him, that stuff happening to him, she would just felt she was on track. But it was just the fact that he was moving so much faster than she was. It didn't make any sense. It wasn't like he was particularly that much better than her. And in fact, on paper, they were basically the same. And then one day, she's sitting in a dinner with the senior partner, along with a whole bunch of others. And it's been a good evening, and the wine has been flowing, and everyone's expansive. And she can hear the senior partner talking, and he's talking about this guy, David. And he's waxing lyrical about just how brilliant this guy is. And he says, you know what, in many ways he reminds me of myself. I can see him one day being senior partner. And at that moment, the light comes on. The senior partner is grooming this younger guy to take his place one day. So he's even broken off a little bit of his practice. He sees himself in him. He sees him almost like a son, right? And effectively, he is making sure that one day he's going to sit in that seat. So it's in everybody's interest for this guy to just, he's kind of got a fast track. It's a bit like speedy boarding, it's better than speedy boarding. It's like when you're doing the fast track stuff and you're in the queue, then you see everyone else kind of going through the VIP. This guy's he's kind of going full VIP. And she realizes that she's just basically queuing along with everyone else and it's all fine. But this guy, because he reminds the senior partner of himself, well, he's going full VIP. And she realizes that there's no one who looks like her. There's no one looking down from that height at her who thinks she reminds me of myself. And that's the problem. That's the difficulty that I think you have. And so I remember her telling me this, and she was just saying how hard it is to do your best and to be acknowledged as frankly, she's brilliant, but you have to queue up with everybody else, and that's fine because of course everybody has to queue up. No one's looking to go VIP. But until you realize that it's to do with the makeup at the higher levels, there's no one at the higher level who's looking down. And I think sometimes they say you can't be it if you can't see it. This is a sort of variation on that. But I think there's a lot of that, and there's too much of that. And so if anyone's watching this who is in an organization who has that mentality, which is, yeah, he reminds me, or even she reminds me of myself, well, you need to spread that love around. What about someone who doesn't remind you of yourself? And what about tapping them on the shoulder and trying to get them through the VIP lane in a world in which they never would, so that they can have a seat at the top table? And what's exciting about 10,000 interns is that it unkinks one of the kinks in the hose pipe, which is around intake. But that's the kink that we're trying to deal with. It's completely that focused on that. But there are other kinks. There are kinks further up. Once you get into the organization, then you've got this kink, which is the kink which says, oh, well, he reminds me of myself, but I'm afraid you don't. So you get to queue up with everyone else, whereas he gets to go through the VIP lounge. And I think that's what you've got to deal with. And it's just about having this conversation and just saying, you know, the next time you see yourself in that position where you could reach out to someone who doesn't remind you of yourself, why don't you do that? Why don't you spread it about a little bit? That, I think, is, if we're going to see change, that's how it's going to happen.
It does seem to be a massive catch-22 of not having representation at the very senior level, and hence juniors will look at the board and say, well, why should I work here if I don't see myself working here in the future? And how you actually break that cycle of empowering senior leadership to be more diverse, and then that trickling through to the organization is a very slow and long process. Over your time in various different companies and having co-founded the likes of Reddington, what have you seen that has worked well in actually challenging that status quo and breaking this vicious cycle?
I think senior management genuinely spending time with people that they feel kind of out of their comfort zone with. So you find senior management are always happy to hang out with people who, as it were, remind them of themselves. It's easy because they're a bit like, they're like my kids, these are like my children. We're all like that. We hang out with people that we find easy to talk to. But someone from a completely different culture, someone who's got a completely different skin color, someone who's come from a totally different background to yours. Maybe they don't even have to have a different skin color, but maybe they're from the LGBTQ plus community, or maybe they've got a disability, or maybe they're a different gender. But someone who's completely different, that I think you start having conversations with those people and taking a genuine interest in them, then I think it gets interesting. So one of our co-founders on 10,000 is Jonathan Sorrell. Amazing guy. I mean, he was president at Man, he's now president at Capstone. But here's a guy who is quintessentially British, white guy, I think of Jewish hereditary, and here's a guy who has no skin at all in the game when it comes to people of black heritage, none whatsoever. But here's a guy who took huge interest, and just over the last 5-6 years that I've known him, just what he has done has just been astonishing, because he's just kind of put himself out there and just said, this has to change. When he looked around Man to start with, he was like, we don't have enough people of black heritage, we need to change this. So he kind of set up a program, got everyone into a room who was black, and just said, okay, tell me, what's it like to work here? How can we make it better? How can we get more people that have your experience into this firm? Because that's what I want to do. He set up a dinner in the House of Lords. He got a whole bunch of black asset managers. There weren't many. So the whole premise behind the 10,000 Black Interns program was that there were only, I think, 12 black money managers out of 3,000. That was the stat. That was the stat that we were trying to deal with and trying to change. Took everyone to the House of Lords for dinner, just because, you take everyone to the House of Lords, well, everyone kind of shows up, and I think we got someone in to come and speak. And he's done a huge amount. And then he was the driving force in a way behind 10,000 Black Interns. He kind of sent me a WhatsApp one Sunday afternoon, and also to Wal Collade, one of the other co-founders, Michael Barrington-Hibbert, and kind of just said, guys, why don't we do this? So we did. We all hit the phones and started calling around and just saying, if we set up this program, would you be prepared to offer someone of black heritage, a graduate or an undergraduate, but someone in that cohort, would you be prepared to offer them a 6-week paid front office internship at your firm? So they're not going to be making coffee and kind of sending faxes, if anyone remembers what those are, and just generally, not doing very much. And, and you feel good, and they don't particularly learn anything. No, you're going to put them on a front office role. You don't have to give them a job at the end of it, but you are, for 6 weeks, you're going to blow their minds and just expand the horizons. Are you up for that? So we all kind of made these calls, and we thought we might get 10, maybe 20 who would say yes. we got like 50, then we got 100, then we got 300, and we ended up with, I think we ended up actually with 200, and it was upper 200s, but we ended up with 500 internships, and the thing just kind of exploded from there. But there's an example. I mentioned Jonathan just because he's an example of someone sitting at the very top of the building who could frankly have just carried on in his merry way doing his thing, but he didn't. He kind of got down, got into it, understood what the issues were, spoke to people, got people to come in. I was one of them. He got me to come in, had a conversation. He's a no-nonsense guy, and he basically, he made things kind of change. So you need people like that. I just use him as an example, but it can be done. It just goes to show. The 10,000 Black Interns program was just phenomenally successful, and it all happened because someone who had no skin in the game decided to get involved and to bring other people into the initiative and kind of get it going. So it kind of needs, that I think would be an example of something that needs to happen.
And there was exponential growth, because if I'm not mistaken, it started as 1,000 interns, and then all of a sudden,
100.
100.
It was 100. We just wanted 100. We just said, let's get 100, because we only had like 12, so let's get 100. But then what happened was 100, and that was in one sector, which was in asset management. Then we said, what happens if we could get 100 across 20 sectors? So that 20 times 100 got to 2,000. And if we did it for 5 years, with 2,000 every year for 5 years, that's 10,000. So we went from 100 to 10,000, kind of like that. And yes, you're right, it was exponential, just went bang, incredible.
And how did you manage that growth, and not just in terms of the growth internally, organically of the 10,000 interns, but then also managing your time across the various other initiatives that you're involved with?
So key to it was getting an excellent management team in place, and kind of the founders understanding very early on that it's one thing to found a firm or a charity or an organization. It's another thing to run it. You've got to do it properly. And we all know what good looks like. So, I've worked at multiple investment banks. Walker Lardy's worked in private equity for a huge amount of time. Jonathan's worked in asset management. I mean, we've all kind of, Michael set up his own firm, and we had really good people at that kind of level looking at what good looked like and kind of sitting down. We sat down, we had some strategy sessions, and then we got a team in place, and then we got some donations in, and we've set it up properly as you would set up any kind of organization, and now it's running and it's working and it's doing its thing, and it's pretty cool to watch it grow.
And another area similar but also different in some aspects is diversity within entrepreneurship. In 2018, you were named Black British Entrepreneur of the Year. As you've gone on to found several companies, how have you found that community from that sort of varying backgrounds and demographics, and where did you fit in within that remit?
I found I'm almost an accidental entrepreneur. I was at Merrill Lynch, and Merrill Lynch is a phenomenal organization, and I was doing what I was doing there, but I got to the point where I realized that if I was really going to make a difference, along with Rob Gardner, if we were really going to change the game, we were going to have to step out into the unknown. So it wasn't like I kind of set out to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I was perfectly happy working as an investment banker. I was doing good stuff. I was being well remunerated. Everything was kind of okay. I was in managing direction. I mean, it was all good. Why would you step out and end up kind of, getting your business card with just your Welwyn Garden City address on it, kind of a thing. But I had this huge passion and drive around, and so did Rob, around making the world a better place by having pensions. We were coming back from Paris on a trip that we'd been on, a work trip. We were kind of sketching this thing out, what we were going to do. And we wanted to do for pensions what Jamie Oliver had done for school dinners. And this is now 2006, right? 2005 shows you how long Jamie Oliver's been around. But it was this idea of democratizing the whole thing. It seemed to us that it wasn't as well done as it could have been. And so for us, it was about having this vision and a passion. I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, you kind of need that. I think a lot of people think it's too hard working in a corporation, don't like all the shackles and constraints of having to come in every day at 9 o'clock or whatever it is and clock out at 5 and do the same old thing. I know, I'll be an entrepreneur. It kind of doesn't work like that. I think, well, maybe it does if you get very, very fortunate, you've got a brilliant idea. For me, the ingredients were, I'd already done my 10,000 hours. So I was, I think, 42, 43. I'd worked incredibly hard and become very, very good at this one thing. And I had a huge passion and vision for how I thought the world ought to be. Those two things put together then propelled me and also Rob into a place where we were able to make that change. But I think you do need that. One thing I will say is that I think a lot of people from minorities who struggle to get employment for maybe the same reason, which is their face doesn't fit. They didn't go to the right university, or they don't tick the right boxes. They don't remind the managing partner of themselves. Whatever it is, they're struggling. Maybe they did get in, but now they're struggling. Often I think they think this is just too hard and I'm going to leave and I'm just going to do my own thing. And then they get into the space of, I'm going to try and be an entrepreneur. But it's very, very difficult to be an entrepreneur. I talk to a lot of people with great ideas, but actually, you've got to set up a proper organization and a proper infrastructure. It's all very well having a great idea. It's all very well even having a little bit of money behind you. It's a completely different thing to set up a successful organization with everybody doing exactly the right thing. You need the right people in the right roles, doing the right things the right way. That is incredibly hard to set up. And if you've never done it before, it's like everything in life. Go try skiing down a double black diamond when you've never skied before. It's hard. And you're going to come a cropper when you hit your first mogul. This is kind of very, very similar to that. You've got to kind of figure out, you need to know stuff. So I think my advice would be get very good at something. Think about how the world needs to be better and how you can do it. And if you've got a great idea, there's never been a better time, by the way. Technology is so cheap, and now you've got GPT. You've got GPT.
Assistant.
Yeah, you've got ChatGPT. I mean, you've got everything, right? There's never been easier if you've got a brilliant idea and you know your stuff. But it's not easy being an entrepreneur, I would say. Never has been, and it's probably easier now than it ever has been, but it isn't easy.
The Investment Banker course by Financial Edge Training helped me to secure a full-time role in investment banking. During my third year at university, I came across the Investment Banker online course by Financial Edge Training. This equipped me with the valuable skills needed to succeed in investment banking, such as financial modeling, valuation, and analytical skills. By enrolling in the course, you can get the same training as new hires to the top investment banks, with our instructors being ex-finance professionals from the likes of Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Barclays. When you pass the course, you'll be awarded with a CPD-accredited micro-degree certificate, which can easily be added to your LinkedIn profile. This will demonstrate your achievement to top Wall Street banks, helping you to stand out from other candidates in your applications. Get started now, just like I did with the Investment Banker by Financial Edge Training. That's something we've talked a lot about on this podcast with many different guests, is this idea of beyond finance or beyond your corporate career. There are these typical routes of, say, investment banking to private equity, and now increasingly finance to entrepreneurship, as in our case. Having said that, what are some of the main differences you found going from working in investment banking, both as a junior and as a senior, to setting up your own firm within the finance space? How much of your time is actually focused on the management, the business setup, the administration, as opposed to what you were doing on your desk back in Merrill Lynch, for example?
Yeah, there's a huge difference. And suddenly when you begin, you're doing everything, because there's you and your co-founder and a couple of other mates that you've persuaded to come and join your merry band in your little boat that you set sail in. But to begin with, you're having to do everything from answering the phone to, I have pictures of Rob and me kind of literally, we were at Brent Cross, we kind of went to IKEA, we bought the desks, we came back, and we're literally putting them all together. And we kind of did it on a shoestring because we didn't have any backing. So what we done, I think we saved something like, we brought about £75,000 each to the table. And it turned out we needed most of that for what was then our FSA registration. They kind of all went on that. So there was like virtually nothing left. So everything was done on a shoestring. And someone said to us, "Look, you really need great offices because perspective is everything. Perception is everything. And so you need to go to Mayfair and you need to choose some beautiful offices so that when your clients come in, they're super impressed. Don't worry about what it costs, just do it." So we went there and checked it out, and someone said, "Yeah, sure, we've got some beautiful offices here. Take a look." We liked them, it was great. We said, "How much?" They said, "It'll be £1 million a year." And we said, "Is that right? £1 million a year? We'll get back to you." And then we found somewhere in Old Street for 50 grand a year, which had no heating and had no air conditioning. And we thought, you know what, that's probably going to work instead. And so we did. We set up there, and we were just going to hire, to begin with, we were just trying to hire people who could crunch the numbers for us. So Rob and I were crunching numbers, but pretty soon, we needed some seriously mathematically gifted actuaries who really understood the whole way that pensions were put together, the nitty-gritty of it, and who basically could do that all day long. So we went to a couple of universities, and we found a couple of undergraduates who were coming in from who were here from China, and their idea was to go back. They were going to go back. They didn't really want to go back. They really wanted to stay here. But getting into, whenever they applied to the big actuarial firms, they always wanted to put them into the Beijing branch. So these guys, their English wasn't great. In fact, a couple of them spoke no English at all. So we went and interviewed like 10 of them, and we needed 2. So we interviewed 10. I think we even interviewed 12. I remember talking to Rob about this on the way back down, and we were like, we couldn't work out which of the 12 we liked, and we're like, you know what? Let's hire all of them. Let's take all of them. So we hired all 12. We weren't quite sure how we were going to pay them, but we told them, look, just come, it'll work out. So we hired all 12. They all came down to London, and there was Rob, me, a couple of others, and then there were these 12 guys, all Chinese basically, all speaking Mandarin. Everyone spoke Mandarin in the office. And so we had to apply for visas. And then one day we got a visit from the Home Office, surprise, unannounced. Knocked on the door, came in and said, we're from the Home Office. We said, how can we help? And they said, you keep applying for visas, work visas, for these Chinese undergraduates. And we just thought we'd come and check them out and just see whether or not it's actually a thing. Could you just please, because it doesn't make any sense if you've never seen, it seems like your entire firm is made up of people from China. So we took them in, showed them, and then like 5 minutes later, they were like, okay, fine, yeah, we get it, we cool. And we just basically, we'd set up this, and I've actually got a photograph of all 12 of them. They did the most astonishing work those early days. But yeah, to answer your question, you end up doing everything. And we pretty quickly learned the red, blue, black framework. So the red, blue, black framework I'll tell you about is a very powerful way of looking at what you do in a company when you're setting it up. So red work is all the infrastructure of the company. It's your tech, it's your admin, it's your accounting, it's your law, it's your marketing, it's your PR. This is the stuff that no one pays you for that stuff, but if you don't have it, your company isn't going to function. That's all red work. And you need people who do red work, and they do the red work. You don't interfere with it, they do red. Then you have people who do blue work, and the blue work is what you get paid for as a firm. So if you're doing consulting, it's about being paid, it's about doing consulting work. If you're crunching numbers for pension funds, then it's the people who are actually crunching the numbers. That's all blue work. You're getting paid for that. Then there's black work. Black work is strategic work. It's really what the CEO and the C-suite are supposed to be doing. They're thinking about the future. Black work is thinking about, where's this firm going to be a year from now? What are the partnerships that we need to be making with other organizations? What's happening out there that I need to be aware of, or we need to be aware of, which is the way the wind is changing. How do we make sure we don't wake up one day and discover that someone else is eating our lunch? That's all black stuff. What you find is that most firms, especially as startups, and some that have been going quite a long time, actually in the same position, is what you find is that they don't really understand or implement red, blue, black properly. So you'll find, for example, that the CEO is constantly doing red work, just fiddling around with, the Christmas cards or the color of the curtains or the carpets, or just coming in and just saying, I think we ought to be thinking more about, why don't we use this supplier instead of that supplier? That's all red stuff. If you're the CEO, what are you doing messing around with this kind of red stuff? Red really sucks time, and it's a zero-sum game. If you're doing red work, you can't be doing black work. And what you need is a balance of red, blue, and black. And if you do too much red and not enough blue, not enough money is coming through the front door, because blue is what you get paid for. If you do too much blue and not enough red, then the firm falls over, because you basically can't deal with all the work that's coming in. And if you do too much red and blue but no black, then guess what? You wake up one day and the whole world's changed because something called ChatGPT came along and you weren't watching. You've got to get your red, your blue, and your black sorted. And there's nothing like setting up a new business to have to figure that out. Now, when you work for Merrill Lynch, they got all that figured. That's what they do. You just turn up every day and you just do your thing. Whereas when you set up a new company, you've got to be on top of the red, the blue, the black. You've got to manage people. You've got to, I don't know if you've watched Ted Lasso.
I watched the first 2 episodes. I've been meaning to watch the rest.
You've got to watch Ted Lasso. I mean, Ted knows nothing about soccer whatsoever, nothing. I mean, he literally doesn't know anything about it, but what he understands is how people work and how people tick and what makes them function, how you motivate them. And anyone who hasn't watched Ted Lasso definitely needs to watch it. But it's like that when you're setting up a business. You kind of need to be Ted Lasso. But you also need to understand what you're doing. So it's much more complicated dynamic.
And if you are a sole founder, imagine, as in my case, I left my old investment bank. I was very privileged to join Financial Edge doing content creation, and I'm also working on a startup. And I know many other people within the space who've recently left the job, either a sole founder or co-founder, starting essentially from scratch. How do you balance that red, blue, and black work from the very beginning point, assuming a lack of resources, a lack of management, lack of team, and then as you start to grow, do you, as the founder, start to pivot towards one area as opposed to another?
Yeah. So the biggest mistake that I find a lot of entrepreneurs make is they go too long before starting to think about red, blue, black. In fact, they don't even have red, blue, black in their minds at all. Some of them go 5-10 years and they haven't really thought about it. And so I often will talk to organizations where the co-founder or the founder is still doing a ton of red stuff that they were doing in week one. So that no doubt, when you get started and you don't have enough money and you don't have enough clients and you don't have, you've got to do a lot of it yourself. You're doing the red, the blue, and the black. But at some point, the stabilizers come off the bike, and probably 9 months to a year in, you're starting to think about, if you're the CEO, you need to be thinking very hard about where the company is going, because it's like takeoff. The plane has taken off now, the wheels are up, but you're only just off the ground. You're a year in, but someone else is trying to eat your lunch, someone else is kind of firing missiles at you, all kinds of stuff is going. You've got to be thinking about it. If you're still faffing around with going to Brent Cross IKEA to go and buy the desks or kind of picking up the phones, then you don't have enough time to think about that stuff. So pretty early on, you need to start allocating it. And what you could do is you start color coding everyone in the firm. You color code all their meetings and everything that's in their diary. And if you are a red person, everything you do should be red. So if you're supposed to be just doing red work, every meeting should be a red meeting. If you're a blue person, pretty much every meeting should be blue. There'll be the odd meeting which is kind of maybe red, or maybe you get sucked into a black conversation. But by and large, it should be predominantly blue for everyone who's blue. And if you are at the top of the organization, i.e. you're one of the founders, more and more and more, you'll be doing a lot of blue because you're the person who brings the work in, but you do need to have a healthy dose of black. And what you find is most co-founders, they're so concerned about getting the blue in that they just think the black will take care of itself. And it doesn't. You suddenly realize you've got issues, but you've also got to keep an eye on red. So you've got your finances, your cash flow is absolutely key. You suddenly wake up and you discover that you're going to run out of cash in 3 months' time unless more blue comes through the door, and suddenly, or you've got a huge client, one customer, and you're heavily dependent on them, and suddenly they tell you, "Oh, I'm sorry, for whatever reason, we're switching to someone else." Suddenly you've got this huge issue, and if you just sit up in the black tower over here, well, guess what? So it's complicated. But you've got to be thinking about it early doors, I would say.
And is this systematic framework something that you've applied across all of your various ventures, both companies and also organizations, the likes of 10,000 Interns?
Absolutely, yeah. Particularly in the charitable sector, we end up thinking about this sort of thing a lot, because I often find that in a lot of organizations, it doesn't just happen, it's not just in finance, but across the piece, you very often find that you don't have the right people doing it. I mentioned earlier, you need to have, first of all, work out in your organization, what are the right roles? Forget about who's sitting in them. This is the other problem when you set up a firm, is you'll often think to yourself, so I know Jake, and we've got Jackie, and we've got Josephine, so we kind of create roles around them. What you really need to be thinking is, if we didn't have those three people with their particular personalities and proclivities and all that they bring or don't bring, what are the perfect roles that we need in this company? If we're just setting up the seating, who do we need? And you need a very good person sitting in your financial control. That you really need someone who understands the numbers. So whether you call them an FD or a finance director or a CFO, doesn't really matter, but you need someone sitting in that seat. But then you need all these what are the roles? So once you've got the right roles, now you've got to put the right people in those roles. So right people in the right roles. And then in each of those roles, what are the things that they ought to be doing in that role? What's the list of 10 things that those roles require of whoever's sitting there? And then how do each of those things get done? Because you can do the right things the wrong way. When you have the right people in the right roles doing the right things the right way, then you're good. Then you're good to go. And it's something that happens across every organization that I get involved in. When I sit on the board I'm now on 7 boards, all of them, same conversations. Do we have the right people in the right roles doing the right things the right way? And more often than not, the answer is not quite. So almost.
Always comes back down to hiring and leadership,
yeah,
and also making the connection between the two in a sense.
Yeah.
And it's great to see that success translated across so many different facets of work which you're involved with, and we can see firsthand the impact that it's having. And it's such a commendable cause, that all these initiatives you're involved with, And we think in the world of finance, it's great to have more people like yourself driving this change. And for people who are maybe a Dawid at home, someone like yourself listening to this podcast at a very early stage in their career, or even at an A-level stage, or someone looking to break into finance, what advice would you impart with them?
I think if I look back at myself when I was 18 or 19 and when I'd fallen over and I crashed and burnt and I didn't get the results I wanted, because don't forget, for most people, that's kind of where most people are. Very few people look at their results or look at exactly where they are and think, perfect, this is beautiful, this is exactly where I wanted to be. Most people either didn't get the right results or they're hit with this crippling anxiety. A lot of people there's a huge amount of anxiety, I think, in our society at the moment. People can't afford to pay the bills. The rents are just skyrocketing, cost of living allowance. And then you look at everyone's Facebook page or Insta page, and it looks like everyone's having the time of their lives. Oh, how they get to go to Sicily and hang out on that beautiful beach wearing that? I'm look at me, and I'm kind of stuck here, and I can't afford to pay my rent. And there's this whole kind of setup that I never had in my day, right? I mean, you got to look at people's kind of grainy photographs, but there wasn't this constant stream of, and it's so addictive. You go on TikTok, and you find it's like, wow, and it's just
doom scrolling.
It's like it's just incredible, right? And the whole time you're comparing yourself, and I think so. We now have a generation of people coming through who are dissatisfied with where they are, and I get that. I understand that. I was a very anxious teenager, huge anxiety. In fact, one of the reasons I went to the bar was to overcome my anxiety. I was hugely anxious about public speaking and about standing up, and so I just went to the bar to kind of embrace my fear. I would say to anyone who is sitting there now at some age between, I don't know, let's say 16 and 30, because that's kind of an age when the plane is just kind of taking off, and you're hit with all these kind of anxieties and this sense of imposter syndrome and where am I going and how's it all going to come together? The answer is you can feel like that, and it will come together. You will also get to 60, and you will look back and you will be amazed at how far you have come. But it won't happen by accident. If you do have to take control of your life. But the fact that you feel that way is not an indicator that your life is a failure, that your life is over, that you're not going to make it. By no means. If you're feeling like that, all that really means is that you have to dig deep, and you basically have to remind yourself that you've come a huge distance from where you were. You've actually come a long way up your own mountain. And with all the anxiety that you feel, the simple truth is you are going to make it. You do have to get your head down and don't give up. The grit, the resilience, it's all true. They say clear eyes, full heart, can't lose. And I definitely I would tell my younger self that I was racked with anxiety and where am I going to be and where am I going to get a job and whoever's going to employ me. Very early on, I remember I just got married. I got made redundant very early on. They moved the office to Wales, and there was no office in London anymore, so I got made redundant. My wife was a junior trainee lawyer. We had no money, and I remember one day I was at home. No job to go to. I woke up Monday morning, no job to go to. I remember taking out some cornflakes and pouring them into the bowl, and I went to get the milk. There was no milk. I was like, okay, I have to get some milk, and I got to the co-op, and it was like 22p for a pint of milk, and I had 18p, and I was too embarrassed to say I don't have the other 4p, so I just went home and ate dry cornflakes. And I remember sitting there just thinking, this wasn't in the script. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And at the time, life is that's very dark. You have to rack to this thing. I just got married. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. You can't afford a pint of milk. But guess what? It turns around and it comes good, and you end up actually in the end. Guess what? If you trust the process, which is getting your head down, working hard, even when you don't love it, eventually you will love it. And eventually you will become amazing at what you do. And eventually you will find your purpose and you will find your meaning, and someone will pay you for what you do. And suddenly you'll be like, okay, I can do this.
Definitely words of wisdom. There's some key themes there as well in terms of overcoming these challenges, persistence, getting those 10,000 hours in as well, all sorts. And I think there's some really key themes throughout this whole discussion that have been invaluable for our listeners, and we really appreciate your time, your insights.
Thanks for asking me.
Thank you once again, and again, a huge well done on all these fantastic initiatives and work you're working on, and look forward to keeping in touch as you progress over the next decade and even
Thank you.
find your sixth gear next time.
My sixth gear, indeed. Well, good luck to you as well with everything that you're doing as well. Congratulations on everything.
Thank you very much, and all the best going forward.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Dawid. Thank you for listening to Cutting Edge. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It helps us out so much so that we can continue to build our podcast and deliver more episodes just like this one.